But the biggest lesson I took from it is the most successful people are not afraid to share. And that abundance mindset, that was back in like 2011, has carried me all the way forward to today.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right. Welcome back, Freedom Point podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. I'm so glad you're here with us again today. I've got another amazing guest. I've got Steve Trang on the show. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise. And I really like having you on the show today because you've got a very similar background as I do in kind of the sales world. Steve is a sales coach. He's also helped thousands of clients generate millions in sales over the past few years in a variety of different industries. His disruptor selling system teaches salespeople to ethically work with customers to discover their true needs and then craft a solution that works for that specific customer. He's also a successful businessman on top of owning, I don't know how many, but several, maybe single family rentals. And he owns apartments. He's also co-founded a bank and a part-time owner with other businesses. So Steve, you've got a lot going on. You've got a colorful background. So maybe you can give our listening audience a little bit more about, kind of your journey, what you're focused on today, et cetera.
Yeah, I think, to understand why I do what I do, I think part of it, we all have our variations of childhood trauma. Not to say we had a bad upbringing, but like the things that we grew up with kind of shape who we are. So I think part of it, is my grandparents lost everything to communism in China. They fled to Vietnam, started over from scratch, lost everything again to communism. My parents fled here. I was born in a refugee camp, and moved here when I was an infant. So very, very capitalistic, right? Uh, don't want anyone controlling my destiny. I think that's part of it. And then growing up in a Chinese household where I'm the oldest of 6 boys, I was always told that if anything happens to mom and dad, you're responsible for making sure your 5 brothers graduate college and get good jobs. And also, when we get old, you're responsible for taking care of us. So there's a lot of responsibility. And I think that kind of shaped a lot of my worldview and how I handle things. And I think that's partially why I've got achievement addiction. And that achievement addiction shows up or has shown up in business venture after business venture after business venture, chasing more dopamine and all that fun stuff. So that kind of explains why all those things happen.
I really appreciate you saying the achievement addiction because I've been trying to explain, how I'm wired myself. And I think you summed it up very well in an achievement addiction. And I quite frankly think it can also be not just a blessing, but also a tremendous curse because it's very difficult for people that have that type of an addiction to shut it off.
It's incredibly hard. You can't turn it off. It's hard to turn off. But where it's helped me, I had a business analyst or professional kind of sit down with me. He's like, hey, look, you can do all these things and that's fine. Right. And here's how it's going to show up. Right. Here's how it's going to affect things. And it's going to affect your relationships. Like, well, I'm going to be present for my kids. I'm going to be present for my wife. Right. I'm not worried about that. But she's like, well, you're going to have people that around you at your office that are going to burn out, are going to quit because they're going to feel isolated because you're so focused on the next mission. They feel like they're on an island. And it was at that moment I was like, oh, because I've gotten that feedback many times over the years. Like, Steve, you build everything here and you're on to the next thing, and then you're on to the next thing. And we feel like we're left to our own to fend for ourselves, which, like, I got kind of defensive when I got that feedback because, like, you know exactly where my office is, and I always call you back. Like, what do you mean you're on an island? but because I am so laser focused on doing more, they feel like I'm unapproachable, which again still boggles my mind because I've always returned their calls. But that's how they felt, and that's ultimately what's the most important. You know this in sales. How they feel is far more important than the reality of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The perception is not always the reality for sure. So I know that you've got this kind of goal, and maybe you can give us an update on what that goal is and how you're achieving it. But your goal of helping 100 people become millionaires. So what does that mission really mean? Can you kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to being responsible for your brothers, being responsible for your parents, right? So there's that support part of the culture, especially being the oldest son in that. Um, when I went to go work for myself, like this didn't exist at all when I was like working a W-2 job, working at Intel. But the moment I went to go work for myself, I'm doing personal development. I read Zig Ziglar, and he says you can have anything in life you want so long as you help enough other people get what they want, right? Like that really resonated with me. Like probably the most of everything Zig said resonated with me. Again, I think because of the upbringing. And then I read Think and Grow Rich, and you hear about how Andrew Carnegie had 18 millionaires working for him, which if you think in the 1930s is preposterous what that kind of money is. And a journalist is like, how did you get 18 millionaires to work for you? He's like, that you're asking the question wrong, right? Because they weren't millionaires until they worked for me, right? And now you see like creating impact, creating legacy. And then many years later on, I read The Go Giver. I can't remember which of the five laws. I think maybe it's number four, but the law of compensation. I think that's what it is which how much you make is directly tied to how much other people around you make, or number of people you help make a lot of money. So like those things have always just resonated with me. And again, I think it's just a cultural thing, upbringing thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and a great call out on three separate books there as well, which I've read all three and would encourage the listening audience to do the same. I'd like to talk a little bit more about your coaching program now, which I believe you call the Disruptors Selling System, and really that system, and you can kind of break that down for us on the podcast episode here, is really transforming the way that salespeople approach their craft. So what does that program or system how is that system set apart from maybe the traditional sales training methods that are out there today?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking this question. So I think for your audience, if you've been talking about sales, they may be further along in the journey, so they understand sales at a higher level. But for like 98, 99% of the population, when they think of sales, they think of buying a car. And it's just this intense adversarial zero sum game where either I win or you win, and that's it. Right. And I hate that model, and I was kind of forced to learn that model, and it was so uncomfortable because you go back to what I my values. I want to help people, right? And so somewhere along the way, I understood how to help people while we're selling. And so, how can we figure out what you want and what I want, and how can we both win? And there's plenty of books that have been written about creating win-win situations, right? Understanding what they want and giving what they want. A lot of books have talked about that. We are very intentional in teaching how to effectively communicate, to fully understand, explore basically their whole brain, right? About what it is that they want, why it's important, what did they try to do to get it, how long they've been trying, where have they experienced failure, what does success look like, describe what that success looks like so they can feel it. And then we go through all that, and then we figure out whether we can give that to them or not. And if we can, we get paid really well. But if we can't, then we can't. We're not going to sell them something that they don't need, right? Uh, the best outcome for what I've done is have all the solutions available and then just give them that solution, right? Once we figure it out, which is the best solution for them. So, for example, I'm sorry about that. For example, um, I, uh, I, my first sales hat when I worked for myself before I worked in a call center, my first sales hat as a realtor was I can only list your house, right? And then I became a cash buyer. So now I can list your house, I can buy your house, and I learned creative financing. So okay, I can list your house, I can buy your house, we could do creative financing. And then we learned some additional tools. So now I can give you all the tools you need as a homeowner. So let's figure out what you need, what the perfect world looks like, and then let's figure out which of my tools is able to give you that outcome. But first, I have to understand, do a deep dive into what's important to you, and then convey to you that I get it because I can explain it back to you. And once you can understand at a high confidence and certainty that I know what you want, when I suggest, here's what we should do, you're all in because you're getting exactly what you want.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. It brings up thoughts like the psychology of selling, emotional intelligence, storytelling. All those things are incredibly impactful for really anybody that's selling anything to possess. So for those individuals out there today, that lack storytelling abilities, or they don't understand the psychology of sales, or maybe they lack emotional intelligence, which is a psychological thing, probably more than anything. But what can the average person do to really level up their sales game?
I mean, selfishly, right? A complete plug is closemoresales.com. That's our services. Because I think I genuinely believe that we have the most complete offering. But if not that, like there's so many sales books. You already mentioned those books. There's You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar by David Sandler. There's Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. There's Gap Selling by Keenan. There's Question Based Selling, Go for No. There's Unlimited Selling Power, some NLP books, uh, Words That Change Minds. It's another NLP. Like there's all these different books, and you can go read all those books, and you can practice, you can apply it, and you can piece it together, like I did. Or you can go to a place where someone's doing it and actually holding your hand and, and listening to your calls and telling you what you did wrong and how to fix it.
Yeah. How important would you say putting in the reps are? All the information is out there for free or for a low cost, right? You listen to podcasts, you pull up books on Audible, you read those books, right? You find coaches and mentors that can hold your hand through the process. But none of that means anything unless you're in a position where you can put in consistent reps. Do you agree?
100%. Like one of the things you hear all the time in the education world, information world, is you got to take massive action. You got to take massive action, right? Which I actually don't support that anymore. I used to. What I support is consistent action. It's like you have to start. Now, we have to say massive action because the average person doesn't want to take action. So we have to say massive action because for them, massive action is like getting off your butt, like, and going making 20 phone calls today. But consistent action is really where it's at because you can't get better without doing the work. Like the only way to get to the other side is through. There's no around, there's no shortcuts. There's nobody that's successful in any business after 12 months. Like you have to pay your dues, you got to pay the price to get success. There's no other way. I wish there were. I wish there were. I would sell that, but there's not.
With the students that you coach and just the people that you know in your personal and professional life, what separates the top achievers from the non-top achievers?
So there's two things that I always look for um, when we're hiring. I mean, there's a lot of things we look for, but two of the biggest things is coachability slash humility and hunger, right? And like hunger kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about like the childhood trauma, like the things that are broken about us, because we're all damaged goods. It's just how it shows up. So that hunger, the desire to win, right? Like there's not a single athlete that is just like, oh, I'm going to wake up and be a professional athlete. Like there's something to prove somebody wrong. There's the hunger. And then there's the humility. Because look, everyone that works in my organization is close on that edge between confident and arrogant. Like they're on that edge, but they're on the confident side. But they're on that edge. And the difference is they're all coachable. They all have the humility to recognize that I have room to improve. Not to say you're not an A player. Everyone's a rock star. Everyone's a Hall of Fame talent. But, Kobe Bryant was Hall of Fame talent with a coach. Michael Jordan is Hall of Fame talent with a coach. Tiger Woods, Hall of Fame talent with a coach. So it's the humility and the willingness to accept constructive criticism, feedback, and then put in the reps to make sure you're doing it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. I'm sure we all know people in our lives as well that they certainly lack the talent, but they're putting in enough activity to make up for that lack of talent. The alternative can be true as well. You have some incredibly talented individuals, even in the sales realm or sales world, that just aren't putting in the reps, and that's why they're not achieving the results that you would expect.
Well, one of the saddest things I see are talented people that are uncoachable because now they don't know, but like they're paying a massive price to settle for mediocrity, right? Like Jim Collins says, the enemy of great is good. Like when you're good naturally, that sometimes is an impediment because you don't know what it takes to actually become great and you're unwilling to do the work to become great. And like, man, my biggest fear is unrealized potential. And that I see that all the time with talented people that aren't coachable.
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
As much as I'd like to continue to talk about becoming a top shelf sales professional and leveling up your game, I would like to learn a little bit more about your diversification in real estate, rentals, and banking and other ventures. How did you decide really where to focus your time and energy when building new businesses?
Man, so this is one of the areas that, you know, I would say looking back, I did it wrong, but at the same time, I wouldn't do it any other way because I wouldn't have realized what I was doing wrong if I didn't do it. So like at my point, I did a presentation a couple weeks ago. At my peak, I had 12 different businesses running. Like it's insane, right? Now it's basically two plus some passive income. Um, and so what I was doing was, going on to the next thing, getting it started, hire people, put it in place, start the next thing, hire people, put it in place, go do the next thing. And if I would have just focused on one thing, I would actually probably be much further ahead, right? But at the same time, I wouldn't be where I am because there's no way sales would have been an earlier part of the journey. I was a terrible salesperson, right? I was an engineer. When I first started, I was horrific at sales. Nobody would ever hire me to be a salesperson. And so it was through this journey that I finally realized, like, oh, instead of doing real estate, I should just focus on sales because people like it when I teach it to them. They'll pay me for it and it's easy. Joe Polish has this expression of running an elf business easy, lucrative, and fun. This is an easy, lucrative, and fun business. That real estate side, it was fulfilling. It was simple, but it was not easy. And there were some years where it was not lucrative. We were going the wrong direction. So the diversification, I was always chasing the next thing. I'm guilty of having shiny object syndrome. As a matter of fact, I tried to buy shinyobjectsyndrome.com, So, that's how you got it bad. And so the diversification was not a necessarily smart thing looking back, but when I was in it, this is the next step, right? Like I'm a realtor. Well, the next thing is start a brokerage. Okay, now I have a brokerage. So the next thing is to start a joint venture with a mortgage company. And then the next thing is to start a title company. And by the way, since I'm already doing all this, I can use the money from all this to fund my marketing to buy houses. Like it all makes sense when you're in the thick of it. But looking back, there was a concept I've learned in the last few years is that we all have limited resources. I always act like I've got unlimited resources and unlimited time. We don't have unlimited resources. We burn people out, like I mentioned earlier, right? We burn people out. We lose people because of how hard charging we are. So I don't. That's not a great answer to like how did I decide, but that's been the journey along the way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's funny, I mentioned this earlier, but we are really truly cut from the same cloth. And I have the shiny object syndrome as well. And I've just chosen to now call that the carrot that I chase after. So there's always another carrot that is out there to go achieve and get after. But you kind of alluded to something else, and that is this transfer of skills. Okay. So I know that you've been involved in a lot of different ventures and you've kind of come to this realization now that it's maybe more important to focus on this one thing, right? But all those past experiences that you had with those other ventures, you've developed skills, and those skills now have transferred into this one thing that you're focused on today.
Oh, absolutely. Like when I had my brokerage, that was probably the worst thing I ever did was starting a real estate brokerage. And like I charge people a healthy amount for consulting, but I will consult for free with anybody who wants to start a brokerage, so I can talk them out of it. Like that's like me giving back, right? Um, but where was I going with this? The brokerage, even though it didn't make me really any money, I was coaching all the realtors on how to build a business because at that point, right, I understood business, I understand outsourcing, I understood marketing, right? So I could teach them all these principles, and I could take someone that was making 30,000 a year. I had two different agents that I took from 30,000 a year to over 300,000 a year in just a couple of years. So I could do this. Unfortunately, realtors are ungrateful people and they don't want to pay a split. So once they've learned the skill, they're going to go to some cheap brokerage, right? That's the reality of the business. So this is not a profitable business because like you help someone become successful, they leave you. Like that's the reward for being good at what you do. But along the way, in helping all these realtors become successful, I learned the skills on how to coach an individual to improve their business over time. And now that is a skill that is very valuable on teaching people how to become good at sales.
Yeah, makes total sense. I'd like to speak a little bit about mindset, if that's okay. And that is, in your opinion, what type of mindset shifts, might somebody, have to implement in the event that they wanted to become the next millionaire or multimillionaire, for example?
So this is something that's said so many times. It's kind of cliche these days, but it's an abundance mindset. And so when I first started, I had a pretty scarce mindset. I thought coaches were scams, right? Like if you're so good at it, why don't you just make more money doing it? Why would you sell this to somebody else? So that was definitely a limited mindset, right? That was the first one. Second, I thought I knew everything. My single biggest regret was that I didn't buy all of Phoenix, right? Because in 08, 09, I could have bought all these houses for 18% interest for $30 to $50,000 and cash flowed on day one. Knowing what I know today, I would have just bought all of Phoenix, right? But I was too smart. I knew 18% is a ridiculous interest rate. You should never pay that. And that's what stopped me from buying, basically the whole city, which was available. And so I think thinking you know everything, and then the scarcity mindset. And it wasn't until there was a time where I had some success as a realtor. I done short sales. I listed properties for banks, did Fannie Mae, Bank of America, and so on. But when the REO business started dwindling down, I reached out. I picked up the phone, called all the top realtors in the city. It's like, can I take you out to lunch? And only a handful of them did, which I'm still eternally grateful for. And when I sat and was asking the questions, they were so open, so transparent. They answered all my questions to the fullest degree because I'm an inquisitive person. I'm going to keep asking follow up questions, almost like a child. I keep asking questions, and they just answered all of it. And what I realized when I was doing it, the lessons they gave me were valuable. But the biggest lesson I took from it is the most successful people are not afraid to share. And that abundance mindset, that was back in like 2011, has carried me all the way forward to today.
Yeah, it's you're exactly right, and it took me a long time to figure that out. Even in my own life as well. But you're spot on. When you start to give back to others, and you kind of open up opportunities for other people in their own lives, that's really when your own self really starts to take off. So really appreciate you talking and highlighting, kind of the importance of the abundance mindset. For those that are just getting started, maybe in their entrepreneurial journey, and maybe that's a real estate agent, maybe it's a technology sales guy, maybe it's a franchise consultant, right? What advice would you give to them to help them create a sustainable path to financial independence and personal fulfillment?
Yeah, I think that probably the first thing is you got to be really clear on yourself, and sometimes it's kind of hard to know who you are until you've gone out there and like eaten dirt. But make sure you're doing what you want, because one of the things that happens, and you see it all the time in business, is like you say, I want more time freedom and financial freedom, and then you get into business and you say, oh, he's making a lot of money. What's he doing? Oh, I want to copy that business. Oh, and that guy's doing this and he's doing this. I want to copy that. And we start copying and pasting all these different people's businesses, but those aren't the people's lives that we want to live. So I think the first and foremost is you got to figure out the lifestyle that you want to have, right? And once you're crystal clear on the lifestyle, go find a mentor who's actually living that lifestyle through business, that's given that lifestyle, not from coaching, from business. Like his business feeds that lifestyle, and go learn from that guy, right? I think that's the first thing. Second thing, a bonus tip. This is something I learned. I wish someone told me. If you still have your W-2 job, go get all your lines of credit before you quit your job. Um, I quit my job, went to go get lines of credit, and I was non-financeable. So if you guys still have your job, go get the loans and then quit your job.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's some great advice. What's really next on, Steve Trang's bucket list, as we move into 2025 and beyond? Any personal or professional goals that you have?
Yeah, so I have two different goals. First, I'm actually actively raising some funds for my business, because I'm trying to build a business that can generate, 1 million a month net, so that I can eventually, if I wanted to, could exit or refinance at a much larger number, right? Like something I put out there is I want to be able to be in a position to sell the company for $100 million. That's the first thing. The second thing, I need a solid operator, because the people who we are today are not the people we're going to be when we're exiting down the road. So right now, I'm actually on the hunt for highly talented, high caliber individuals to help me execute. Because like what got me here was hiring people and training them. What's going to get me there is hiring someone that's been there, and they're going to help me get there. Right? It's a different point. I'm a different season now.
It's the definition of leverage.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's great. So, what would be maybe one or two different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
So to learn what I'm up to, Instagram is probably the biggest, at steve.trang, Stev.Trang. To learn more about the program, closemoresales.com. We do have a script that we give away, as well as a script review. If they want that, they can text script, SCRIPT, to the phone number 33777. And yeah, I put a lot out there for free. Again, if we're helping people, that is the single most rewarding thing. We get people messaging us all the time about how they did this, from watching our content, and we're able to do that. We also have a podcast, Disruptors. So if you go to YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Disruptors is the name of our podcast. I didn't realize when we rebranded from Real Estate Disruptors to Disruptors how many Disruptor shows there are. So we got to figure that out. But you can also, follow along on our podcast to see what we're doing.
That's great. Well, we'll definitely put those links in the show notes for the episode today. Steve, I really appreciated the tremendous value that you brought our listening audience.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, I do appreciate every opportunity I have to give back, because you never know who's gonna impact, how they're gonna benefit, and then every once in a while it comes full circle. One of the things I learned along the way later on. Sorry, I keep running this over. Was I had people reaching out to me in the last few years who said, "Hey, I've been watching you for a while, and I'm reaching out to you now because you were doing this." So like, you're building a digital footprint for people to see who you are. And if you're not doing it, you're missing out on some opportunity. So like, every opportunity I have to give and give, you never know who's watching and how it might come back.
That's right. Yeah. And everybody has a certain amount of brand equity, and, you build that one drop at a time. So again, appreciate the tremendous value that you brought the audience today.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Absolutely. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next. episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.